This book contains mature themes which may not be suitable for all audiences. These themes include graphic violence, sexual violence, racial violence, racism, and suicide. Additionally, this podcast is not spoiler-free. Listener discretion is advised.
Hey guys, welcome back to Bleep Noise, where we meet one time and one time only to present to you one hearty list of sponsors. We also read a book. Since it's almost Halloween, we have an extra spooky podcast for you guys. Today we will be discussing Beloved by Toni Morrison.
Beloved provides a reminder of the horrors of slavery.
It brought a descriptive narrative to how people lived and were treated very close to when the Civil War ended.
Beloved follows the story of Seth, a former slave who had a deep connection to her children. Facing the threat of being captured, Seth takes her two young daughters into a shed and kills one of them to prevent her from facing the horrors of slavery.
Many years after its publication, multiple schools were banning this book due to its content. Many parents became disgusted when they heard that it contained bestiality, rape, infanticide, and racism.
So, before we get into the points of the book that jumped out at us, why don't we discuss whether we liked it or not?
I thought it was deep and full of drama, and I liked how it touched on topics that aren't normally talked about, but it was not a light read. It was very emotionally taxing, and I didn't enjoy reading it, but it did provide insightful commentary.
I think it was a very well thought out book. One of the main characters is Sybil herself. It is very dark and true, and it didn't sugarcoat events and kept the truth of what happened in high regards. It was heavy on the heart and something that you will think about even after you stopped reading.
Beloved is an appealing work of text by having a twisted plot which disgusts me, but continues through the corrupted life of the main character. The way Beloved comes to 124 is somewhat supernatural, especially when Seth recognizes her first as her firstborn daughter.
I love the way the book was told in a series of flashbacks, and I found the overall topic of the book to be extremely interesting. Because, I don't know, I like kind of the disturbing stuff. I also liked how the book was very real, like I said, in the sense that nothing was censored.
So now let's get into some themes and major things to bring up. Starting with the topic of slavery, which is very prevalent in the book, as it is a book about slavery, and the era post-slavery that isn't really talked about in the media. In the beginning of the book, Morrison writes the dedication to 60 million and more, which is likely a reference to the African Americans and others killed in slavery, and who went missing, and we don't know what happened to them.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's just overall, anyone who was affected by slavery and how it, so deeply affected the people who were involved with it.
Mm-hmm. So, jumping off of that, I want to propose a question. Given that you were in Seth's situation, would you kill your child to ensure that they don't experience slavery or get kidnapped by slave catchers, even if that means not being able to raise them and personally taking away their life?
Well, this sounds like a conflict in moralities, of course, since obviously life is valued in today's society as something that's precious, but back then, people didn't want to contribute to the force of slavery that plantation owners were using. So, logically, I would support killing off my offspring to not let them be taken or being tortured by other people.
I disagree, especially since Seth, for the most part, she made the choice to bring these children into the world. She had a kid with Hale. They knowingly made that decision. I think it was kind of wrong for her to do. It's not like these kids were unplanned, per se. And, I personally just would not be able to live with that blood on my hands. I don't know. I would have tried to make the situation as best as I could for them before I, went to such an extreme measure. But I guess I see where she's coming from.
I can totally understand where you're coming from in that, sense, not killing them, because I'm such a wimp and I could never be able to live with myself. But if her plan was, and if she was deeply religious, to kill them and then kill herself to escape from this all, I can understand where she's coming from. But you're right, especially at that moment where people are chasing you, I don't feel like I have the guts or that amount of power to take someone's life, especially someone that I'm so close to and that I held with me for 9 months.
Yeah, and this question doesn't have a right answer. I just wanted to propose it because I think it adequately portrays what the plot of the book and what Seth had to go through, and also how difficult the decision was to begin with.
There's a couple of pages that seem to have a strong correlation to the chains of slavery. In page 113, Seth is supposedly being massaged by Baby Snug's spirit. but the soothing then turns into a violent strangling. Denver and Beloved then come to aid Seth after she can breathe. When Denver tells Beloved not to touch her, she then comforts her by soothing the bruises on her neck. I correlate this strangling to the iron chains that people imagine one day to pick a slave.
A point that I thought was really important in terms of slavery and kind of race that like really stuck out to me was this quote on page 234 that says, "White people believed that whatever the manners under every dark skin was a jungle, swift unnavigable waters, swinging screaming baboons, sleeping snakes, red gums ready for their sweet white blood." In a way, they were right, but it wasn't the jungle blacks brought with them to this place. It was the jungle white folks planted in them, and it grew. It spread until it evaded the whites who had made them bloody, silly, worse than they ever wanted to be. So scared were they of the jungle they had made. The screaming baboon lived under their own white skin. The red gums were their own. I thought this quote was so important, especially because it really just makes you realize, like, kind of why everything is the way it is in terms of racial attitudes, especially at this time. And it also just highlights kind of the poor treatment the blacks were getting at this time. You know, white people were portraying this image onto them that they were like unruly and, you know, savage, but really their behavior was savage and messed up. So yeah, that point really stuck out to me. The topic of slavery also affects Seth's role as a mother, like, in a huge way. And her role as a mother is a super important point in the book. She tends to be very devoted, like, very, very passionate about her children, and which justifies her kind of... It gives you light into why she went as far as she did. And a quote that kind of summarizes this point that I thought was really important is when she's talking to Paul D. It's on page 194. He says, he's kind of telling her, you know, you love your children too much. You're a slave. You could lose them. You can't, like, you're going to hurt yourself if you keep doing this. Seth says, love is or it ain't. Then love ain't love at all. Yeah, but then Paul D says, yeah, it didn't work, did it? Did it work? And she says, it worked. And he says, how? Your boy's gone, so you don't know where. One girl dead, the other won't leave the yard. How did it work? And she says, it ain't my job to know what's worse. It's my job to know what is and to keep them away from that, from what I know is terrible. I did that. So I thought this part was really, really interesting because she's going back and kind of justifying why she murdered her kid. And this part shows how she is as a mother, and it really kind of provides characterization of Seth. And it's just a really important point of the way that slavery impacted her motherhood.
I see motherhood depicted in the book as a parasitic thing that goes on in the second half of the book. Seth is shriveling in age, becoming a smaller and older woman. This is a relationship that happens between Beloved and Seth that's supposedly what's supposed to happen after Beloved's death. So in this relationship only happens temporarily between the mother and the child, which, as I said before, something that couldn't be continued after Beloved's death.
Yeah, I agree that it's a parasitic type of relationship. She is very devoted to her children in a way, like Paul D said, it kind of hurts her. Alexa, did you want to add anything to that?
Yes, actually, I would. So in the beginning of the novel, the first line, I thought it was very important. It brought up a very good point about what the book is really about, and it gave a little bit of foreshadowing. That line is, 124 was spiteful, full of baby's venom. The woman in the house knew it, and so did the children. For years, each put up with this spite in his own way. But by 1873, Seth and her daughter Denver were its only victims. This quote sets up the novel nicely in that these are the first words spoken. This quote establishes a lot of important points that can be considered foreshadowing and also sets up a couple of main characters in the book.
Yeah, I think it also relates to Seth's role as a mother in that, like, she kind of acknowledges what she did to Beloved, but it just kind of, like, haunts them, literally. It's not something that she likes to address.
An interesting juxtaposition to the first quote in the book happens on the last page, on the last paragraph. The quote says, This is not a story to pass on, so they forgot her like an unpleasant dream during a troubling sleep. This is not a story to pass on. Down by the stream, in the back of 124, her footprints come and go, come and go. They are so familiar. Should a child, an adult, place his feet in them, they will fit. Take them out and they disappear again, as if nobody ever walked there. Beloved. I think this is really, really important. As I said before, it juxtaposes the first line in the book, and it brings up the point that though that was such a crucial part of the house in the beginning of the story, the ghost of the baby no longer haunts them physically or metaphorically.
In one of the quote in the last page of the book, it says, other than what they themselves were thinking, she hadn't said anything at all. So in the end, they forgot her too. Just like Alexa said, how at the end of the book, they were questioning whether or not they really met Beloved. She was no longer part of their life. They were she was no longer in their memory at all. But like she said in the beginning, she was very prevalent. She was the reason that two of her sons left. Beloved is a embodiment of all Seth's guilt for her past and what she did to her baby. And after she realizes what Paul D says to her on the second to last page, that you're your best thing, Seth, she realizes that she needs to stop obsessing over this and nothing she can do will make it better.
Yes, I think the end of the book is really just kind of a resolution for her, because I feel like she finally, after all she's gone through, she's been raped, she was enslaved, all these things, she killed her daughter, she's finally finding peace within herself to move on from it.
And just to go off a little bit on that, on the gray area of reality and illusion, the themes keep on repeating where the spirit lingers because of a major event that happened, and that it's not necessarily that everyone remembers about it, it's just the place needs to be in there, and that it's a repetition of the scene going on. But this goes beyond that onto Seth, which is mainly going everywhere from Kentucky to Michigan.
I just wanted to ask a question real quick. What significance do Beloved's arrival and departure have, in your opinion? And does that contribute to her being more of a spirit or more of a human?
Since we all read the book, we know that when she entered, we assumed that she would feel calm because her baby's finally back, but she seemed stressed out. She always had to apologize to her and tell her that she was sorry for what she was doing, and she had to prove herself to her. And so it just seemed kind of not a juxtaposition, but the opposite of what you would expect.
I'm not really sure what I think of Beloved being human, but I do think she's an excellent symbol for an idea and the concept of Seth's past, and in addition to Paul D's past and the past that Denver didn't get to live with them.
I totally agree with that, because Beloved comes into Seth's life when her and Paul D decide they're going to have a kid and move on with their life. I think it's like you said, kind of a representation of Seth needing to move on, and get over Beloved's death and her past before she can have a happier life.
So now, after discussing the major themes and points in the book, would you guys recommend it to other people or not?
I would recommend it just because, as much of it was a difficult read because of the content, it seemed like something classic that it was good to have under your wing. It brought the dirty truth to the surface, and as uncomfortable it may be, it doesn't make it any less true.
In my opinion, it depends on the kind of person that's reading it. If the person is lighthearted and too emotional, they will either be scared or touched by their hearts as if they were watching a horror film, even though the touch of party doesn't count, blah. I recommend it to the fortified, relaxed person, because they can clearly read through the book without interruption and hesitation.
I would recommend it. Although the book starts off slow, the story becomes so interesting, in my opinion. Additionally, although there are many heavy topics that some people may not enjoy reading, I do think it's important for people to be educated on the many horrors of slavery, because this book provides such a good insight of what people dealt with at this time and how it affected them, even if they were freed.
Personally, I wouldn't recommend it because, as Gwen said, it did start off slow, and it was really uncomfortable to read because there were so many themes that left me crawling in my skin, but that was one of the major points the book was trying to make, and I think it succeeded in that.
We are running out of time, but I hope you enjoyed today's episode, the only episode we'll ever make. Again, we'd like to thank our sponsors, which is... Thank you for your time. We won't see you later. Or will we? Nah.